Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're actually going to be talking about the ZX Spectrum Next. Yes, you heard that correctly. Not only did I pronounce it like I was British, but we are actually talking about the ZX Spectrum. Before we do that though, if you guys can do me a favor, please like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, and check out all the social media stuff in the description. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, Spreadshirt, my travel channel. Please support me on all those platforms. Thank you so much. Let's get on with it. So, yes, first up, just let's get this out of the way. This was sent to me, well, I shouldn't say sent to me, it was given to me in person at the London Gaming Market a couple weeks ago at the time I record this. By a buddy of mine named Chris, who, along with a guy named Henrique, Henrique's the lead engineer of this whole project. They effectively just supplied me with one of these ZX Spectrum Next by Sinclair, which is pretty cool, and we're going to talk all about it. Now, there's a lot to kind of preface this video with. Obviously, based on my my accent, for lack of a better way of explaining that, I am an American. I did not grow up with the ZX Spectrum. I have never really used the ZX Spectrum. I don't know much about the ZX Spectrum. I can only tell you everything I can from the perspective of an American. So I know a little bit of the history, and I know a little bit to talk about with this particular thing, but I just wanted to get that out of the way for all the British in particular who are like, dude, I grew up with it, how do you not have all these memories, etc. You have to understand this system. All right, here's what you need to know that I do know. The ZX Spectrum launched in the UK in 1982. I believe it also came out in mainland Europe. It was a huge hit in the UK in particular, to the point where that just became like the console, or platform more accurately, because it was technically a home computer, that really represented an entire generation, Gen X, of British gamers. However, its attempt at coming out in North America was at best a joke. I believe it was in 1983, Timex, they make like watches and stuff, did a release of it here, but it was a blink and you'll miss type of release. It fell flat. I mean, that was the same year as the video game crash in North America. It really never had any sort of shot. Personally, I don't think I've ever seen one. I don't know anybody that has one. It was a platform we never had. But in the UK especially, that platform, which we're going to refer to, of course, as the ZX Spectrum, because any American would read this, or Canadian, Canadians mixed bag, but Americans anyway would definitely say we would say ZX Spectrum. However, because it is, of course, a British platform, we'll give it to them ZX Spectrum. So, yeah, it comes out there, it becomes a big hit, and to give my American viewers in particular, and I guess Canadian viewers, kind of a framework of what the hardware was like, kind of like an NES, or NES to all the British, and to all the British who just started rage typing at their keyboard, it's so much better than an NES, just calm down. I know it's more capable, I'm aware of all of that. I'm just saying from a visual fidelity, shall we say graphics perspective, an American will look at that and go, looks kind of like an NES game. Alright, so we're all on the same level here, okay, cool. But yeah, a whole base of people grew up with that platform, they loved it, it became a big hit, and I believe it used cassettes actually for its games. But as I said, the system really never did anything here. So fast forward all the way to 2020, they did a new one, kind of like at the height of the Super Nintendo and Nintendo classics that were coming out, Sega Genesis Classic, even that PC Engine / TurboGrafx 16 Classic, all that stuff. This came into existence. This item itself is actually not new. And it existed back then, people did videos on it, it was a whole thing. I just wasn't part of that group. However, the reason we're really doing this is they were cool enough to give me one of these, which was nice of them, but also they're actually launching an entirely new model. I guess it's going to have all sorts of upgrades, bells and whistles. I think at the time of this video, their Kickstarter is just about to start, or just has started, so you can check that out. I'll put a link in the description if you want to support it, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. But yeah, I really thought it would be kind of fun to approach this platform from the perspective of someone who really has no dog in the fight as far as what this thing, how it performs compared to original hardware, or what the game library is like, any of that sort of stuff. Let's go in fresh as an American. But I must preface this again to all the British viewers, I don't know what I don't know about the ZX Spectrum. I don't know the intimate details of its history. I do not have childhood memories of it. I am not familiar with its game library. Okay, so just give me a break on this. I'm sorry, but at the same time, kind of refreshing to go into a platform I know just nothing about. Okay, cool. So with that said, yes, we have this thing and we're going to talk all about it. So at first glance, especially to American viewers, this is just going to look like a keyboard, maybe even a fancy little RGB lit one or something, but no, it's not. It's got a full brain inside of it. And that was a lot of the way these home computers were back in the day, Commodore 64, stuff like that, as I'm sure a lot of you guys know. This particular model, and again, I can't even compare it to the original because I simply don't know any better. If you want to use it, it's going to have additional features that certainly are modern. So like on the side here, one of the most obvious buttons, so you see it kind of just popping around. It's just in, standby mode effectively. But if you press reset, which is what I just did, there's a red button there that does that. It'll bring you over to this screen, and this will just give you all sorts of like information, options. That's how you load in games and all that sort of stuff. There's an additional button that I think is very important though. It's the, I believe, the yellow button over here. That brings up a completely separate setting screen, and that's an important one. Particularly for Americans. Now, I do not know if it is stock this way or not. I apologize for the lighting because I'm sure it's being inconsistent now. But when I got this, it was set into 50 hertz mode, and you have to change that by going into the settings there. You want to change that to 60 hertz so that it will work with a North American television, modern day television, or even legacy hardware. So you can play it that way. Because basically back in the day, the UK in particular ran a lot of stuff in 50 hertz, which is essentially 50 frames per second. We ran things in 60 frames per second, which is faster. It's not so much that you care about the speed. It's a lot of the TVs simply do not support both, at least back in the day. Right now, here in 2025, my primary TV did not recognize this thing until I made that change. However, this monitor and other monitors did support it, so I was able to change it. It's just worth noting. But I also have to say this. Because a lot of these games were developed for 50 hertz, I have no idea what the effect is of changing it to 60 hertz. It may be something that they compensated for in this build of the hardware, or it could be a situation where it creates compatibility issues or it creates speed changes in games. I do not know. As I just said, I don't know what I don't know. So, but I do know that if you wanted to display it all on most North American televisions, you will have to switch that to 60 hertz. Okay, so after that, we have, like, there's a few other buttons around, but mostly I didn't need any of this stuff. On the back, there's a lot of legacy stuff that you can use. There's additional options there. We have a PS2, PS-2 mouse and keyboard interface. If you choose to use an external mouse and keyboard, you can. Apologies if you hear any sirens out there. It happens. I'm centrally located between a hospital, a fire department, and a police station. So it's like, hey, I don't know, juggling act. Which one is it going to be today? Anywho. So you can use that for legacy keyboard and mouse. Some games apparently really do need that. You also have a VGA/RGB port if you want to connect this to a CRT instead of a modern day display. And with that comes an audio out 3.5 millimeter audio jack so that you of course can get the audio. It also has a microphone in, I assume, it says ear mic. Oh wait, no, so that's probably external. I didn't actually use that. So I assume that's just headphone jack, now that I think about it. There's two USB micro ports. I don't actually know what those do. I would assume there's various compatibilities and whatever things that could use that. There's a digital video debug, what looks like a micro HD port, or HDMI port. Again, didn't tinker with that. What we're using is the HDMI just straight up port because I wanted to use this in the most non-enthusiast way. What I mean by that is someone who's not super into this platform and super knowledgeable and a purist. Someone who's just like, I'm just gonna sit down and see what this thing is. That's my perspective for once. And so we're going with it. And then lastly, you have the power. This was, to me, the strangest choice. So what I had to ask about this because it was a little baffling to me. So cosmetically, I guess the system looks a lot like the original. It looks like an updated design, but it should give you, if you are British, Gen X, you grew up with this thing, it should give you a measure of nostalgia from its appearance. And to that end, they designed the power cable the same way. So when you plug the power in, it just immediately turns on. There is no power switch on this thing. So when I asked them about that, they're like, oh, no, we designed it the same way as the original. You plug it in, and it just turns on. And I was like, They did that for nostalgic reasons, you know, so that the people who grew up with it that way, it feels the same. But as someone who didn't grow up with that, I look at that like it's almost like a design flaw. I look at it like I want a power button. I don't want to have to like unplug stuff every time I use this or don't use this, you know. But again, that's just me outside of that box, you know. But to that end, there also was, this is probably not standard, it's probably because they just literally handed this to me at the London Gaming Market, but the one I got came with a British power supply, which makes perfect sense, you know, their style 3-prong adapter. The voltage is exactly the same support as North America, so in this particular case, you don't have to worry about step-down converters, but I still need an adapter to physically use it in North America. However, I imagine if you bought this through the Kickstarter or whatever, they would give you, like, you know, one that's actually for your region, so you don't have to deal with that kind of shenanigans or that's chicanery, good word. But anywho, yeah, so no problems with any of that sort of stuff. It works just fine. And then on the front, you have 2 controller ports, both of which are the DIN 9, like Sega Genesis or Mega Drive style controllers. What was recommended to me was arcade sticks. One in particular they threw in was this Sega Master System arcade stick. So I was like, all right, cool, I'll roll with that. But it should support a bunch of anything that Sega made back then, Atari stuff, even like various third-party ones. But arcade sticks were recommended. As I said, on the side, there's also the 3 buttons, and there's an SD card slot. So what's interesting about this is, unlike, say, the Sega Genesis Mini or the NES Classic or any of that stuff, it didn't come preloaded with, like, select titles from the corporate overlord that created it. Instead, they gave you an SD card and said, find your own adventure on the high seas of the internet, perhaps. And so effectively you can just go in and get the whole library if you want to. And to that end, we have like a whole folder that Chris made up that's got all sorts of stuff on it. So I'm looking through it like, I don't know any of this stuff, but it was kind of fun to go through that. But yeah, as far as that goes, it ran pretty well. It seemed to operate correctly. It does have some quirks that I, as a standalone console gamer, am not used to. But it was interesting to see, because this thing is like a weird fusion between a console and a PC, as if they aren't already kind of like that these days. But to that end, what I mean is, you plug it in, you get your signal, and you go to find a game, right? Again, I'm no expert on the ZX Spectrum, but it seems like there were different iterations of it that had different amounts of RAM, and that allowed for different versions of the games to function, or something like that. Again, I don't really know the details on this, but so when you play one of these games, a lot of the time it'll prompt you with a screen that's like, which version do you want? And theoretically it should support all 3 of them, but I have run into instances where it does not. Like, I think it was like, there was a Batman game that if I put it on standard, it wouldn't boot, but if I put it in one of the higher modes, it worked fine. And then there was a few others where it totally worked in standard, and you know, etc. So it was like, it wasn't that hard, but it's like there's some troubleshooting. But anytime you like one to run that crashes, or you run into one that crashes, you press the red button, just reset and try another mode or try another game or whatever. But I should also mention the controller options are a little funky. So again, console gamer, I'm used to like, I just have a controller and it's playable. This is not necessarily the case here. So when you boot up a game, often you'll be pressing buttons on the controller and it's just doing absolutely nothing because it's waiting for you to make a command prompt on the keyboard, the actual built-in one. Often it's spacebar, you know, to get you to the next screen. And then once you're there, a lot of the time it'll have a controller prompt and it'll be like, how do you want to play this? Do you want to use a keyboard? Do you want to use the built-in keyboard? Do you want to use a mouse? Do you want to use a joypad? Sometimes they refer to a joypad, aka that controller, as like some word that starts with a K I'd never even heard before. So I've never, whatever, it's there. You'll figure it out. But I got, you know, once you figure that out, you're good to go. However, there were some games where I was never presented with an option. I would just boot them up, and I was immediately thrust into the game, and the controller wouldn't do anything. Or there were games where I was playing them, or I was trying to play them, I was getting through all the screens, and then once the actual gameplay started, I couldn't do anything. Probably because they were games that don't support the controller. And you need like an external mouse or an external keyboard or stuff I just simply don't have. But the games I was playing with the actual controller were kind of interesting. I think the one I spent the most time with, there was a Batman game that I was just talking about. It's kind of weird. It was like a Batman treasure hunting game, for lack of a better way of putting it, because it's like the combat operations were kind of unnecessary and didn't really matter much, but it was still just kind of fascinating. I played some weird version of Strider. Audio seems to be kind of all over the place. Like, some games have music, some do not. I don't know what's up with that. I assume it's not a technical limitation of this thing. I think it's probably just how the games actually were. But again, I don't know. I don't have that kind of frame of reference. But it was, you know, I gotta say, it was just kind of fun to look at this thing and just be like, what the hell is even that? Like, I'm just looking at it like, what are these games? Because it's a system where I cannot name what the bangers are. You know, I don't know what the most successful, like, great games for the ZX Spectrum are, just simply due to a lack of cultural osmosis. I never absorbed it, so I just don't know. But so I was kind of like going with titles based on IPs I was at least familiar with, whether or not something like Strider, where you know it as a game franchise and you're just curious what that version is like, or like Batman, you know him as a character or whatever. Then there were other ones that I didn't capture footage of, but like there's some Donkey Kong clones that are also called like Crazy Kong and stuff like that. You're like, what is this? And then there's like entire libraries of stuff. I'm just like, I've never heard of any of this. I have no idea what I'm in for. But, you know, it's kind of fun to just play experimental and, you know, just roll with it. I also want to add one thing that's cool about this is they included the Sinclair ZX Spectrum, like, I guess you'd call it next book. So, again, I'm not an expert on this, but as I understand it, in the 80s, the ZX Spectrum actually included this, like, a book, and it basically taught a lot of kids in the UK how to, like, program stuff, so you could, like, making your own games on this thing and encourage that sort of development. And to that end, they've actually done an updated version trying to encourage people to continue to make games for it. And I think that's just a neat little touch. Not something I could ever do, but I like the fact that it's there. So I hope you've enjoyed some of the footage I've had just kind of rolling over all of this. But, yeah, in a nutshell, that's been my experience. And to its product value, I would say this is probably something I think a lot of Gen Xers in the UK in particular would really enjoy. I think it would give them warm nostalgia berries where they would just sit down and be like, childhood, but updated. I'm here for this. Maybe some millennials as well. I'm not entirely certain. Again, I did not grow up in that. But I think that would be good. I also think it would be good for anyone who has like a passing curiosity within the UK or perhaps mainland Europe, who's just kind of studied British gaming history, etc., and just is interested in where it all came from per se. I think that market exists. I also think that this is good for anyone outside of that, the anomalies, who really are into your retro gaming PCs, but also into the stuff we didn't get. I know those people exist. I'm friends with several of them, where they just want to see like, hey, you know, I want to see all these games from these other platforms we didn't have, etc., etc. Those the standouts. But I will say, as just kind of the casual in the situation, which I'm very much not used to being, I don't know what that demographic is. Like, I don't know how much of this appeal this would have to, say, like, Gen Zers in the United States who don't know what it is and why it's even here. Like, they don't know anything about it. I think that the demographic value is to the British in particular. That's where your bread and butter is in this particular thing, because it basically appeals to nostalgia, right? So any new entries into it, I think would be, I'm not going to say it's a hard sell, but I think it would be a little tougher outside of that system. But I could be dead wrong because, again, like I said, I don't know what I don't know about this system or platform more accurately. So, but that said, I'm a believer. I've had some fun with it, and I think it's pretty cool. And I think if you want to, if you're interested in it, rather than get this model, like I said, there's a new Kickstarter out. Focus on the new one. You can go check that out if you want to. You know, that would be cool. Or you can support me. And you can do that by liking my stuff on this video. You can like, comment, subscribe. You check out all the social media stuff. There's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, Spreadshirt, Travel Channel, etc. And I also want to once again give a big shout out to these guys at the ZX Spectrum Next project. Chris and Henrique especially. Thank you very much. So in the meantime, though, thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you all later.